Sir Edric Vaelthorne had never known defeat. But as he dragged himself from the temple, his body battered, his soul tainted by the dark magic that still lingered in his veins, he knew that this was something else entirely. Each breath burned, each step sent agony lancing through his ribs. His armor was ruined, cracked, and smeared with his own blood, the sacred runes upon it flickering weakly. Behind him, he could still feel her gaze, Daemonweaver, standing upon the temple steps, watching him with that smug, knowing smile. "Run, little knight," her voice purred through his mind, though her lips never moved. "Run back to your goddess. Tell her what you've seen." His warhorse, Valiant, was waiting for him where he had left it, snorting and stomping the ground, sensing its master's pain. With a final gasp of effort, Edric pulled himself into the saddle. And then he was gone, galloping into the night, leaving Vel Tarsis behind. Leaving it to her, Daemonweaver stood in the temple doorway watching his retreat, golden eyes gleaming in the moonlight. Behind her, a city knelt in chains, and she was far from finished. Vel Tarsis had once been a bastion of purity, a city that stood in the light of Amara's grace. But no longer. Under Daemonweaver's rule, the city rotted from within. Its people offered a choice: submit to the embrace of Lothenia, or your soul will feed her. And many chose to kneel. The great noble houses, once filled with warriors, scholars, and the wealthy elite of the realm, had become palaces of excess and vice. Where once the nobles discussed politics and trade, now they whispered oaths of devotion to the dark mistress who had claimed their city. Silken veils and golden chains adorned the once proud lords and ladies, their bodies branded with the sigil of Lothenia, their souls bound forever to her service. They reveled in pleasures both divine and profane, their laughter turning to cries of ecstasy and pain as they gave themselves completely to the new order. The streets reeked of incense, wine, and sweat, the air thick with the sound of revelry and despair. Daemonweaver did not hide in the shadows any longer. She ruled openly, her name no longer whispered in fear but spoken in reverence. Her throne was the temple, the altar of Amara desecrated, its marble now stained red with the blood of those who had refused to bow. Those who resisted were made examples of. They were hung from the gates, their bodies left to rot, their souls ripped from their flesh and fed to Lothenia's ever-hungry maw. The priests and paladins of Amara who had dared to stand against her were not given the mercy of death. Instead, they were broken, corrupted, remade in her image, their faith twisted into worship of Lothenia. Many fought at first, screaming prayers to Amara. But Daemonweaver was patient. She whispered to them in the darkness, showed them visions of pleasure, of power, of a world where they did not have to be bound by the rules of their weak goddess. And one by one they fell. The grandest paladins of the temple now knelt at her feet, their shining armor recast in black, their eyes burning with hunger for her approval. Vel Tarsis belonged not to Amara. It belonged to Daemonweaver, and the world was beginning to take notice. Those who had embraced Lothenia fully bore her mark upon their flesh, a sigil of shadow and flame seared into their skin, forever binding them to her will. The mark was more than a symbol. It was a bond, a promise that they belonged to the Dark Queen. To carry the mark meant to be one of the chosen, to be blessed with forbidden gifts, the ability to bend others to their will, to revel in pleasures beyond mortal comprehension, to wield the power of darkness without fear. And those who bore it, they were no longer human. They were something else, something more, something eternal. Beyond the walls of Vel Tarsis, rumors were spreading. They spoke of a woman, a priestess unlike any before her, a being of beauty and terror who had taken an entire city and bent it to her will. They whispered of a new goddess, one older than the world itself, one who had awakened from the depths to claim her dominion. And the name of her servant, her prophet, her priestess of corruption? Daemonweaver. The name slipped from the tongues of merchants, carried on the wind to distant courts. It was hushed at tavern tables, spoken in awe and dread by those who had heard of Vel Tarsis's fall. It was etched into the minds of rulers who now feared for their own cities, their own people, their own souls. Something was coming, something unstoppable, And Daemonweaver was only just beginning.